I believe that an end of an era has come. Guan Yu is no longer a meta commander in Rise of Kingdoms, and today I will tell you exactly why I believe this. I'll go over his current synergies with the newer infantry commanders. I'll discuss why I believe his skills are just not up to standard. I'll show you literal reports of Guan Yu just not being a strong commander, and I'll give you a final verdict on whether or not you should be investing in him still, or should you even still use him on the open field. So if you want to know more about Guan Yu's future potential, and if he will still be a good commander in Rise of Kingdoms, you definitely want to check out the rest of the video. Let's start off today with a quick disclaimer, and that disclaimer is, this is my opinion. I'm going to be basing this opinion on some facts that I've got, some skill reading, some comparisons and synergies that I've seen with other commanders, but at the end of the day, this is my opinion on Guan Yu. You may have a different one. You can feel free to let me know in the comments, but please do not be aggressive to me or other people in the comments. We are all here to respectfully express our opinions, and I will express mine today with some facts. We'll start off with comparing Guan Yu, though, to the current meta commanders. And the first thing we should look at is Guan Yu's active skill. And the first thing about his active skill is it's an AoE to 3 enemies in a forward-facing fan-shaped area with a damage factor of 2000 only if he's the primary commander. If he's the secondary, that damage factor is half to 1000, so right off the bat, has to be a primary commander. Not necessarily a negative thing, just something you should keep in mind. The next thing to note here is that each target he hits, the damage is reduced by 15%. That is typical for any commander with an AoE. Then, the best thing about his active skill, which is probably what makes him still even close to being in the meta, otherwise he'd be on the bench already for every single player, is that every single target he hits with his AoE is actually silenced for 3 seconds. So this silence is probably the most powerful thing he's running, but his damage factor is definitely still going to be a fairly important part of his kit. Compared to most commanders, his damage factor is actually oddly low. Currently, Scipio, the meta infantry commander, has 2000 damage factor already in a forward-facing 3-target fan-shaped area, and he doesn't even need to be the primary like Guan does. So, right off the bat, the current meta infantry already have better AoE. Obviously, you got commanders like Sargon and Tarek. They don't have AoEs though, so I can't really compare them. But if we look at the metas for other troop types, let's say archers, ZHUGE has Guan Yu's damage factor except to 5 targets in a circle AoE. Much better than Guan Yu's damage factor. Then the next commander that'd be similar to Guan Yu in terms of the way that you'd use them is Joan. Joan's got Guan Yu's damage factor to 3 targets, 2000 in a forward-facing fan-shaped area, but guess what? She can throw the active skill twice. So what does that mean for Guan? Well, his damage factor is just not meta. It's just not up to the meta anymore, even compared to some of the tankier primaries like Boudica and Henry. While they may not have Guan Yu's AoE, they bring other stuff into their kit that kind of makes up for that missing AoE. So Guan Yu definitely missing out on that damage factor, so the only thing he's really got that's up to meta on that skill left is his silence. But what if I told you Lilith has been nerfing that silence? People don't really notice it, but through commander releases, Lilith has literally been actively nerfing Guan's silence pretty much. And what I mean by this is, Guan's silence is meant to be a way for him to somewhat counter commanders that are meant to counter him. Yes, it's a support thing, it's meant to support Immutable, but it's also meant to be there to help him sustain himself, because he is overall a glass cannon commander, and if you reduce the amount of damage factor targets are dealing by dealing damage factor to them first, which is what silence will really do, you're in a good position, especially with Guan. If you get silencers to line up, that's when he becomes really good. But since Lilith has been releasing more and more commanders with silence immunity, just straight up immune to silence, you've been noticing Guan Yu has definitely been losing a ton of effectiveness. It started off with Boudica. She was released with her expertise having an 80% chance to dispel any control effects. And what's a control effect? Well, really, in the short of it, it's silence. Silence is the main control effect. Heal, immune, and disarm are not very major. The only reason they made Boudica dispel control effects was literally through hard counter Guan. And the worst part about that for Guan is Boudica already hard counters pretty much every infantry in the game. Make her super hard counter Guan, you've already got an issue there with Guan losing another part of his kit. Not only does he not have meta damage factor now, all expertise Boudicas are pretty much going to be immune to his silence all the time. The next issue came when they released LIANG, and the reason LIANG was the biggest issue over Boudica was because you still needed to expertise Boudica to get that silence dispel, and most players were not willing to get that 4th skill unless they were a really diehard archer player or a really diehard archer main like myself. So why did LIANG become an issue for this? Well, LIANG gets a 50% base chance on his 2nd skill. Don't even have to level up 2nd skill, just on the unlock, if the skill's level 1, to dispel all control effects. So right off the bat, you've already got a commander like Boudica who can negate those effects if she's expertise, and there are still a fair amount of people who run expertise Boudica on the field, but now you've got a commander like LIANG who can do the same thing. Obviously, it's a lower chance, but it is a guaranteed thing. You don't have to level up any of his skills, you get it on the unlock, So a lot more players have access to this, and a lot of players have that second skill maxed anyway. So even if it was part of leveling up the skill, a ton of players have access to it. So right off the bat, we've got a commander like Boudica, who's meant to counter infantry, hard countering Guan, and then they make ZHUGE, who's meant to counter infantry, once again, hard counter Guan. Now, the reason this becomes an even bigger issue is because Guan Silence is an AoE. You don't really get to pick and choose which commanders that AoE hits. And the reason that's an issue is because on the open field, you're probably going to hit a Boudica and a ZHUGE with that AoE. Like every now and again, I'm sure you're going to hit either one of those commanders. And that usually wouldn't really matter too much. If you hit a Boudica on the open field, it'd be like, oh nice, I got a free amount of AoE kills and I silenced that enemy. But the issue is, Guan Yu is losing that silence effectiveness because what's going to happen is Boudica is actually going to soak up that silence effect, and she's not even going to be silenced at all. She's just going to soak the effect from everyone else around her. She soaked it in, and she's just going to dispel it. So it's not even going to do anything to her, and since ZHUGE is often run separately to Boudica, I've seen a lot of players running ZHUGE separately to Boudica. I personally run ZHUGE separately to Boudica. A ton of players are going to be running two commanders which have a high chance of dispelling Guan's silence, so that means Guan Yu's silence can't even be as effective as it used to be, meaning sometimes he may hit literally no targets with this silence and get that silence to stick. Obviously, the AoE is still going to hit 3 people, but the AoE silence, if it's just hitting Guans and ZHUGEs, is not going to be nearly as effective. So I would say maybe once out of every 2 skill cycles when you're going to usually get 3 silences, you might only get 2 silences. So it's already like a nerf to his active skill that's already weak in terms of damage factor. So his silence really, really powerful against infantry and cavs who cannot dispel it. But nowadays, with a lot of archers on the open field and a lot of players running Boudica and a lot of players running ZHUGE, they're going to be soaking up that silence effect and definitely hurting Guan's current effectiveness. The next issue with Guan's kit is actually second skill, because it's in the way to the rest of his kit. If a commander had a skill, such as a rally skill, which is what his second skill is, further in their kit, it's good because that means if you want to get to the rest of their kit, you can get it all and just ignore the rally skill. So if the commander has a rally skill in the 4th skill slot, that's really, really good. Guan Yu's rally skill is their 2nd skill slot, not even the 3rd. A lot of commanders nowadays have their rally skill in the 3rd skill slot, so you can get 5-5-1-1 on the commander's skills, and then you could just leave the rally skill and the skill behind it. Often commanders with their first 2 skills are very usable. Guan Yu, on the other hand, really you have to go past that skill and hope you get kind of lucky, which can increase his current investment price. The next skill of his is his 3rd skill, and it's just got rubbish stats. This is meant to be his stat-heavy skill, and all you're getting is 30% attack and 15% march speed. The healing factor is okay in some very rare situations. Most of the time it sucks. So Guan Yu's 3rd skill, which is meant to be giving him a ton of stats, is giving you 30% increased attack and 15% march speed. In comparison with current meta infantry commanders, we've got a commander like Scipio Africanus with 40% infantry attack just all the time has 15% march speed like Guan, but can also gain another 10% when off alliance territory, and has 20% health. So right off the bat, Scipio, way more stats than Guan. We know that Sargon has pretty much got more stats than Guan, 10% attack, 20% health. Also, he has a chance to gain another 20% all damage. He has 15% permanent march speed and permanent 10% all damage. And also he gains another 10% defense while he's on the map. And he has a shield, which Guan does not have. So right off the bat, you can see Guan Yu in stats-wise compared to other primary commanders and other meta infantry, not on par. And compared to Lao Che, that's about to be released soon, definitely not on par because Lao Che has 20% defense. I'm pretty sure he's got 20% march speed and a 20% skill damage taken reduction. So Guan Yu's stats on his 3rd skill, not even close to meta. His damage is close to meta. His stats on the 3rd skill, nowhere near where you'd want them to be. So that's another issue with his kit. Then for Guan Yu's 4th skill, this is pretty much a skill that's just going to increase the damage factor he deals on his active skill. And this skill is actually fairly good. This is probably a skill in his kit I can say doesn't really have a very major downside. The damage factor is decent here. On average, you're going to get around 700 damage factor. You'll probably be hitting more than 2 people with an AoE. 50% chance. So 700 extra damage factor to his active skill. It's decent. It's nothing game-changing, but it is fairly decent. And back when he first released, that was absolutely insane. Hate to break it to you though, it is still not meta. A lot of commanders nowadays are rocking really high amounts of instant damage or extra damage to their active skill. For example, Scipio has pretty much got an extra 1,500 possible damage factor to whichever target he's hitting, so that is much, much stronger than Guan's, around 700 on average. And then the next thing to note here is other commanders such as ZHUGE on their active skill can pretty much guaranteed trigger things that Guan is doing, except they're better. ZHUGE on his active skill deals a 1500 target AoE to 3 enemies. This actually doesn't even get affected by the damage reduction, so he's dealing 4500 extra damage factor right there, which is just straight up more than Guan is doing. So yes, that is a decent increase to Guan's skill damage, but it's still not even close to meta, to the point I'd say like it's a good skill. It's just a meh skill. It's like, it's good, but it's nowhere near the meta, and it's probably something that's not really going to add too much to his effectiveness, which is a very, very sad part about it. And then the final thing to Guan's kit is his expertise, and I'm going to flame his expertise as well. His expertise is pretty much useless. Whenever he leaves a structure, he gains 100% march speed. So whenever you leave your city, you can run faster a little bit. Whenever you leave a flag, you can run faster a little bit. It's nice if you're reinforcing flags, but other than that, often you're going to notice this doesn't change much. And also, whenever he gains a shield, he increases his skill damage by 15% for 3 seconds. Now, that skill damage increase it's nice, but once again, there are so many much higher skill damage increases in the game currently, especially, of course, with meta commanders. Boudica Prime is a great example of this, except she's got a debuff version. She makes the target take 35% increased skill damage. ZHUGE gains literally permanent 20% skill damage just whenever. Nevsky is another example who has way more skill damage than Guan. Like, it's not even close to the amount of skill damage that Nevsky gains. So, Guan Yu's skill damage, yes, it is a nice boost. It was fairly decent when he first released. It's just not even near the meta nowadays, with so many more commanders dealing way more skill damage. And then the next thing is that some of the new commanders being released aren't even affected by skill damage, and they are some infantry commanders. And that brings me on to the next thing with Guan, is that he's not really synergizing very well with the new upcoming infantry commanders. Lao Che is the next infantry commander to be released into the game, and he looks like he'd work as both a primary and secondary commander, which would be a good thing for Guan, since Guan needs to be a secondary commander. So you would hope that Guan Yu with Lao Che perform as well, but let me show you some reports I gathered the other day that I showed in my video on Lao Che. Here are the reports. I ran Guan Yu with Lao Che. Guan Yu was the primary commander against Nevsky with Joan, the current meta Cavs, and you would hope that Guan Yu, a supposedly meta commander, would be able to beat the meta Cavs if he's using other meta commanders. Unfortunately, I think you can see here that just was not the case. You can see I ran 3 reports. All 3 were pretty much the exact same, with Guan Yu getting absolutely decimated. Not even close to beating Nevsky with the Joan, and he's got a meta commander secondary. Can't even say this was Lao Che's fault though, because Lao Che with CPO absolutely decimated Nevsky, which actually does bring quite a disadvantage to Guan. And that disadvantage is, why would you invest in Guan currently when you could just get your CPO and put him with a Lao Che, who's literally just going to be better than Guan? So Guan is in a really tough situation where he's working really well with CPO, like he's working decently. Not really well, but he's working decently. But CPO is about to get a new commander that's pretty much there to replace Guan, who's got more damage, more stats, he's got debuffs just like Guan, he trades good, unlike Guan, and he's going to be the best paired with CPO compared to the other infantry commanders like Sargon and Taric, especially since most players don't even own Sargon and Taric. CPO with Guan is probably going to be split up, and you're going to have a CPO with a Lao Che, and I don't know what you're going to have to do with your Guan. That brings me on to, though, should you even consider investing in Guan anymore? And I think that the simple answer is, unless you're a whale, don't do it. If you're not a whale, don't invest in Guan. Do not get him from the daily special offer. He is not really worth it as much as he used to be. I would have said before, yeah, he's an okay investment, but nowadays, unless you're spending a lot of money per year, he's probably just not worth grabbing from the daily special offer. Or maybe if you've just hit Season of Conquest, you can justify getting Guan. But for the most part, he's just not high enough value for me to say that you should be using him, especially since Lao Che is going to be pretty much replacing the Guan with the CPO, especially in the open field, and there's no point investing in Guan. It's kind of like getting, for example, YSG over getting ZHUGE. It just does not make sense when you could just get ZHUGE, the better commander, or you could go backwards, invest, and get YSG. While yes, YSG has some advantages over ZHUGE, like he has more rage gain and he has more overall skill damage boosts, ZHUGE is just an overall better commander. So yes, Guan's silence is really strong, but Lao Che is also extremely strong, to the point where it is just overall better than Guan's silence. I cannot say justifiably that Guan Yu is better than Lao Che, and you obviously cannot say that Guan Yu is better than CPO Africanus. It just does not work. So I think overall currently Guan Yu is just not a very good investment. As for open field usability, I think he's still going to remain somewhat usable. He'll work good in larger murder balls where you're just trying to get very large amounts of debuffs on your opponent so you can get the biggest advantage possible. So he's going to work with 7 march murder balls. He's going to work with players who are running those larger balls. Maybe if you're running 3 or so infantry marches, even if you're running 2 fairly decent infantry marches, Guan Yu is going to work quite well. He'll work with Sargon, he'll work with commanders like Tarek and Scipio. Issue is, though, he's definitely being phased out by the new infantry commanders like Lao Che, who are just going to eventually replace him because they purely outstat him to the point where his silence is just not even worth it because he's going to trade so negatively. So what is my overall verdict on Guan Yu? And the really short and simple answer here is do not invest in him. If you currently use him on the open field, he is still usable, but keep in mind that he is lacking on skill damage and the rest of his stats are fairly low, to the point where I would say they can't make up for his silence effect. Before, his damage factor was so high that it would be like, okay, he's really glass cannon, but his damage is just so high that it just makes sense. He's already dealing enough damage to the point where even if he gets swarmed down, there's a chance he still trade 1-for-1. But now if he gets swarmed down, he gets swarmed down, he's going to be completely destroyed, and he can't even win in some one-on-one battles. So the only reason you still use Guan is really for a support, or if you're swarming rallies in Ark of Osiris. So overall, I'm just going to say it, Guan Yu really is not an amazing commander anymore. Now that I've been able to publicly express my opinion, I want you guys to express your opinions, and the best way for you guys to do that is to go down in the comments section below and let me know, what do you think of Guan Yu? Do you think that he is actually still an amazing commander and I'm completely wrong? Or do you think that I'm correct? Do you think that Guan Yu is one of those commanders that is starting to show his age a little bit and is going to become less and less used on the open field and you wouldn't recommend most new players invest in him? I'm very curious to hear your opinions. I respond to every single comment within the next day or two. So whatever you believe, let me know down in the comments below. I am very interested. Now, I just want to say thank you very much and I hope to see you in the next one.